Hello everyone. So it's time for another of our little Waterside chats. So this is me in the boat. This is the Waterside chat. Except there's no water out there. The boat's actually up on sticks in a boatyard. But you can't tell that from here, even if I lifted the blinds there. So that's kind of leads into the topic I want to cover today, which is that reality is not what it seems. So we've talked about how in any mature development environment you need to have a computationally independent view, a view that reflects the business reality before and separately from developing either an application or some data model or the data to go with an application. We've talked about the need for this kind of conceptual model and, for example, ontologies, and we talk about how an ontology, people often think, oh, it's just another kind of data model. And with one kind of use of ontology, it becomes that. But ultimately, an ontology that you need as a conceptual model is a model of reality, not a model of data. And that's what we always tell the data people. But the dark secret is, reality is not what it seems. We want to hold it out as being a model of reality. And at the same time, so how does this work? Well, we only apprehend reality through the conceptualizations of things in our minds. And when we're creating a conceptual model for an organization, we're effectively trying to do for that organization what our brains already do for us in the way our minds are constructed, which, as we know from cognitive psychology and from philosophy and so on, the unknown is the real world, and the known is the information structures in our brains or in our corporate conceptual ontology that reflects that. So how does it reflect that? Well, you've got symbols, words and so on. You've got real things which are just shuffling about, sort of chaotic, unknown stuff. And then we pick things out of that real world and we give them an identity and we say, okay, here is a thing. Now, what kind of thing is it? Is there a set of things like it? And we have what's called the extension, the set of those things. And we have the intention, a way of representing those things. So I'll give you an example. So some people get a bit stressed by this and think, oh, that just sounds like solipsism and, you know, saying the world doesn't exist and so on. Well, that's kind of nonsense. We know the world exists. It's just that what we model and represent of the world isn't the world, it's our representation of it. And only, what's the technical term for it? An idiot thinks that there isn't the real world itself. So, I'll give you a silly example. So, up on the deck here, I've got a nice view across a nice broad piece of British Columbia, and there's a little ridge, and there's a train, a little sky train that shuffles along that ridge. And most of the time, all you see is little flashes, little kind of darkenings and lightenings of things, and you can't really make out anything of what it is. But there's one place it crosses where you can see it's a train. Once you see it's a train, you follow it, and you follow the darkening and lightening as it comes in and out behind trees and things, because your brain has locked onto that thing and given it an identity. It's given it thinghood. We said, here is a thing, and now we can persist that thing, and doing what our brains are really hardwired to do, pretty much, which is, you know, seeing things that shuffle through the bushes, and either we're hunting them or being hunted by them, and we want to distinguish these flashes of light and dark for some specific entity that we want to eat or avoid being eaten by. And that's the same thing with the train, with anything else. It's what the psychologists call object persistence. So we create an object persistence, we give something an identity, not necessarily an identifier, not yet, but we could. We say, here is an identifiable thing, we've given it thinghood, and now we can start to say, well, what sort of thing is it? What distinguishes it from other things? And that feedback between our model and the world is how we know that our knowable model, our intention with an S, definitions of things corresponds to actual things shuffling through the bushes and so on. In fact, I saw a really cute snake yesterday running across the path, but it saw me as well and ran faster. So, so that's how, it's not solipsist, it's just practical reality that our conceptions of things in the world come via intentional definitions. Intention with an S, and intention corresponds to the extension, the set of things, the way we've carved up the world into sets of things and given them thinghood and so on. The intention is a logical definition of what it means to be that kind of thing. Typically, we can create an intention using a set of words. We can say, here's the intention of the set of things that can be used to make melodious sounds. And we can say, well, the extension of that is the set of all things that are a musical instrument. So that gives you a concept now of a musical instrument. So concepts are split into intention and extension. Now, a better way of doing intention is to define these things with formal logic, and not just any logic. So if you look at logic, it's like, if A then B, A therefore from above B, but it doesn't care what A and B are. We have what's called predicate logic. Predicate logic is predicated on something. Now, here's where it gets a little bit difficult, because the simplest way of thinking of this that a lot of people would think is, well, okay, so in order for this logic to be predicated on something, that something must be real. So I can't talk about a meeting that hasn't happened yet because it's not real, because it's not been instantiated in the real world. So it's easy to kind of conflate that instantiation in reality with that predication. So, and in some ontology frameworks, what's called realist ontology, that's exactly what you do. If you're working within a realist ontology like BFO, you have to do that. You have to only assert things that have been instantiated in some real or possible world. So you can't talk about next week's meeting as being the same thing as when the week has come and gone and it's now last week's meeting. So the passage of time, you have this weird sort of dissonance between something that's a mental state in reality and something that's a meeting that was instantiated in reality. But most of our data and most of our business discourse doesn't work that way. So that realism works great if you're doing chemical or biological formulae where you've got one concrete set of intentions that can represent one set of instantiable real things that everybody agrees about. But most of our data that we want to integrate, particularly in large institutions and banks and pharma and insurance and so on, we have different data that's representing different things in different ways. Now, the ontology is not the data model, but it's the computation independent model that we want to reconcile all that data with. So, and likewise with language, if we're looking at AI, we want to have explainable AI, we want to be able to say what are the real things that some AI is talking about. We can't limit that to a single view of reality that pretends that the extension and the intention are always the same and that the world is somehow knowable. We have to grasp that fact that the world is not knowable other than through our intentional representations of it. And so we have to be able to talk about, for example, if I say, the meeting next week, and then the week comes and now it's the meeting today, and maybe it's 5 minutes later and there's 3 different people you didn't expect there, it's still the same meeting. Or you can ask the question, is it the same meeting if all the people are different to who you expected and you may be in the wrong room or something? Is it the same meeting? To talk about the same meeting, to talk about the meeting, you've created that object persistency, you've created thinghood about a meeting before it happens, and it's the same thing. Just to be able to ask the question, is this the same meeting, means you're talking about a persistent object that is the meeting before it happened. And likewise with a plan or a design, a risk event, a thing that you want to avoid. So in any real or possible world, it is that which is avoided. You can't therefore talk about it only when it's been instantiated, because hopefully, if your risk management system is any good, you manage not to instantiate that risky event. You still want to talk about it, that thing that mustn't happen. Or if somebody's telling you a falsehood and you want to be able to look at the meaning of what they're saying and say, you can't tell lies without meaning any more than you can say truth without meaning. So you want to be able to look at, what does it mean? What are the persistent things being talked about in this data or this speech act or this piece of unstructured text that your AI is running over, or whatever it is you're doing. So in order to reflect any real world normal way of thinking about stuff and not have to go back to the business with some big story about realism and instantiation and all that, if we say the meeting or the design for this car that we haven't even put the first pen on paper yet, but that's the design it's going to be, things about it will change as time passes, but it's a persistent object. It's that train running through behind the trees. It's that snake sneaking along in the grass, and you want to see where it is. You've given it that persistence as you follow it along. And so for that reason, we have to revisit this idea of predication. We're not saying, oh, this is all just wordy waffle because we're not instantiating things. Instantiation and predication are two different things. In realism, they coexist, fine. They're coextensive. But when you're dealing with this cognitive science or Kantian philosophy, whatever you want to call it, this separation of intention from extension, and the fact that we only know the intention, our predicate logic is not predicated on real things. In fact, it can't be realistically because we don't know real things. Our predicate logic is predicated on that full set of possible intentions. And this idea of, realism will say, oh, it's real or possible world, kind of feels a bit of a workaround. It doesn't always work, as I say, for things like future meetings and plans and so on. But if we say our predicate logic is predicated on those intentional representations of those extensions of things in the world, that includes all intentions, including lies and falsehoods and avoided risks and plans and so on. So it is fully grounded, the logic, it is fully predicated, but it's predicated on that intentional view. Effectively, although we call it ontology, it's really a phenomenology if you want to get really technical, but don't worry about the words. Our predicate logic has to be fully and formally predicated on the intentional view, the set of intentions by which we as individuals, or we as a community who decide to share this ontology, or we as the organisation, where we have this ontology as our organisational brain, is predicated on that set of intentions. And so that way we deal with the fact that reality isn't what it seems, but we're all dealing with reality in a compatible way. And in fact, we create ontologies, in particular ontology standards, as a way of having everybody subscribe to the same set of intentions, the same definitions of what it means to be this thing or that thing, without getting hung up on whether it's instantiated in some real or possible world. It's something the organisation is thinking about. We have a concept of it. We know that that concept is useful either in reflecting reality or avoiding it, or understanding when somebody else is lying about it, or whatever the intention is for. So that's really the story. Reality may not be what it seems, but if we're using predicate logic to define real things, we must ground that, we must predicate that logic. There's a verb behind predicate logic. We predicate, we make those variables attached to something real, but something real isn't real, it's intentional with an S. It's predicated on those intentions. So thank you for listening. This is my Waterside chat. Hopefully next time or the time after I'll be back in the water. We'll see. This is Waterside chat from 6 meters up in the air. So thank you very much.